The countless multitude and their strange wounds had caused my eyes to be so drunk with tears that they had rather linger there to weep upon those sad and mutilated shades. Like all of Dante's cantos, Inferno Canto 29 perplexed me. Here we find shades unable to lift themselves up, leaning against one another like stew pans warming in a kitchen, and covered from head to foot with loathsome scabs. Each one, writes the poet, ceaselessly applied his nails to tear his flesh by reason of the frenzy caused by the itch, which has no other salve other than the eternal scratching and tearing at the scabs, like a knife raking off the scales of a fish. You may at this moment, as I did, wonder what grave and terrible sin was accomplished to render this eternal punishment suitable. For as the English librettist William Gilbert wrote, the punishment must suit the crime. I sought to understand what these shades had done, and so, skipping forward in the canto, we find at the end the sin most grave performed by these shades in life. One confesses that he had been thrust into the low stage of hell because, quote, I practiced as an alchemist. Now, at reading this, I was shocked and somewhat appalled. Certainly, being an alchemist, whether male or female, in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, or in the colonial era, was socially risky. But was it a heinous enough sin to cause one to be burned alive and then tear off leprous skin for all eternity in hell? It seems it does, to Dante and those of his age, for he writes, quote, Then you will see I, who made false metals once by alchemy, and you should recollect, and mistake not, how as an ape to nature I excelled. And with these words, the canto ends, and I paused on these words, how an ape to nature I excelled, feeling their power and dwelling on why to mimic nature would be so dire. And then I paused again. A quote from Canto 29, and from the valley such a stench arose as oftentimes will come from putrid limbs, writes Dante. Putrid limbs, evocative, commentators have noted, of the decay of plague victims. In April and May of 2021, news reports began to tell us of the horrors of rapid, unprecedented death in India from COVID-19 and its variants. The crematoriums were overwhelmed, bodies washed up on shorelines, the dead were piled in parking lots. The smell of rotting flesh and burning flesh was incessant for days. And from the valley such a stench arose, as oftentimes will come from putrid limbs. In June of 2021, what had seemed to be specious early claims that the 2020 pandemic had been generated in a lab in China began to emerge as probable. News headlines buttressed the claims that the virus had been born in a lab and then leaked, sweeping through the globe with a hellish perniciousness reminiscent of science fiction. The USA Today reported that deleted COVID-19 genetic fingerprints show it's still possible to dig for lab leak evidence. The reputable Nature journal headline read, The COVID lab leak hypothesis, what scientists do and don't know. And NBC News read, Wuhan lab leak theory, behind the source and origin of COVID. Thinking of decay following on the heels of human experiment, we return to the canto. Dante's shade tells us, quote, What I died from does not bring me here, but because I practiced as an alchemist. Oh, the terror of the terrible things our hands can do in concert with our minds. Perhaps in a lab, perhaps science turned in on itself, away from the maker, toward the made, like the smell of putrid limbs. Like Lady Macbeth, we have stood this year looking at our hands, washing our hands, and seeking to wash away the stench of our hubris, possibly that of our alchemical experiments. Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth speaks, quote, What will these hands ne'er be clean? Here's the smell of the blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Wash your hands, put on your nightgown, look not so pale. He cannot come out of his grave. What's done cannot be undone. To bed. And so we watch the news and imagine the stench rising as we pursue the truth of origins, and we listen to the poet who warned us of the punishments of alchemy so many hundreds of years ago. And yet we scratch at our scabs and wonder when we will learn. Here's Canto 29 again, the two in dialogue as they walk. Quote, "Meanwhile, my leader, Virgil, traveled on ahead, and I behind him pondered my reply, and added, down within that darksome pit, upon which I was gazing so intently, I think a sprite of my kin bemoans the crime that has such fearful retribution."